South Carolina Code of Laws 1985, Section 30-4-80-E. The following have been notified of the time, place, and agenda of this meeting. The Herald, Charlotte Observer, CN2, and WRHI. We'll start off, if you all would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We'll now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Murphy is not able to be with us right now. He had an event with his son. He may join us a little bit later. You all have received a copy of the agenda. Were there any adjustments or corrections?
No.
All right, that will stand as unanimous consent. Ms. Pettis, do we have any public participation? No. All right. We've got a couple of different staff reports, so we'll start off with 3.01, which is a report of the new procurement code. Ms. Kelly Kinston. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Keniston, the District Procurement Officer. You may remember me from my Shark Tank presentation with the desk shields, so I am back.
And we love your contacts.
I think it's great to see you without plexiglass and masks, so this is great. So I wanted to stand before you this past fall. The state of South Carolina approved and distributed a new school district procurement code, which in turn led us to revise the Fort Mill School District Procurement Code. We also revised the new procurement procedures, and we also have new exemptions that I would like to briefly review with you this evening and then vote on it at the next meeting. In your packets, you'll find a copy of the new district procurement code, which is based on the code from the state. We have accepted this document in its entirety and have received approval from the state to move forward with it. I have included a page highlighting the major differences, which is up on the screen. These are the big ones that are going to affect the district, which is what I'm going to kind of review with you this evening. The first change can be found in section 1524, and it's dealing with resident preferences. And what this is any vendor can request this when we have a formal bid or request for proposal. This clause provides a preference for any end products made in South Carolina or in the U.S. So there's a matrix of all the, I won't go into all the great details of the percentages associated with the end product, the contents from South Carolina or the U.S. And as far as services, if the supplier has, is resident to South Carolina or they employ people in South Carolina. The next section is 1550, and it pertains to the spending limits throughout the district, which is the biggest change that I'd like to review with you this evening. The purchases requiring procurement involvement have gone from $2,500 to $10,000, which would require 3 quotes, and that allows the schools to have a little bit more autonomy. I don't have to get involved, my group doesn't have to get involved with any purchases under $10,000. The next threshold after that would be the $25,000 limit. It was previously $10,000. Anything over $25,000 has to go out for a formal bid or request for a proposal.
So these are good changes.
They are good changes.
They're just provide a lot more flexibility and a lot less paperwork.
They do. So we still are going to see the purchases that are over $10,000 because we need to ensure that the schools, the departments do have the required 3 quotes. Okay. So if it's a procurement card, the limits will be set, and anything above that, we would have to change the requirements in Bank of America, and we log it so that for any audit purposes, it shows that procurement has approved it. Yes. And then anything over $25,000, they have to come to us anyway to do the formal bid or quote or however we decide to do it. The next change is sections 1560, 1570, and these pertain to a sole source or an emergency procurement. So a sole source is, a lot of times we'll have a distributor, they're the only authorized distributor in South Carolina for a product. So we'll request a document from them. We write up the paperwork, get the appropriate signatures. The change that the state has imposed is now if it's over $50,000, we have to advertise it.
Advertise it
As in, let another vendor come and say, hey, wait a minute, I disagree with this. So before we can actually, if it's over $50,000, before we can make the purchase, we have to post it in South Carolina's business opportunity website and allow them, depending on the limits, there are different time frames depending on the limits, on how long we have to leave it out there. Which, not over 50,000, but it's something I wanted to bring to your attention. The other thing that could possibly is the emergency procurement. So you have a leak in the roof at a school, we repair it. If that is over $50,000, we're still going to do it, but I have to post it, again, out on the South Carolina Business Opportunities website and allow a vendor to challenge it. I don't think this is gonna be a huge impact on us. I don't see a lot of that, but it is something we need to consider. For the sole source, the superintendent can override this if he feels or we feel that it's necessary. I don't see a case where that would be it. We do our due diligence and get the appropriate paperwork before we declare it a sole source. Excuse me.
I don't think I've ever been asked to override one.
This is new.
Okay.
But now you
I don't like to override. I don't like to override the CFOs on things.
And these are why I'm also bringing these to your attention, Dr. Epps, because some of these are new that you will be seeing my bright, shiny face on some occasions, more than normal.
It'll be a pretty serious leak, I guess.
The last item is a pre-bid conference, and that is in section 2042. When we go out for a formal bid or a request for proposal, especially for a maintenance item, if they're going to do a major repair at a school, major landscape, whatever, we'd like to have the vendors come in and show them what the work's going to be and give them an opportunity to ask questions and see what's actually being asked of them. Especially for the high dollar ones, it's important that they fully understand what our expectations are. The state has asked or has actually mandated that we cannot make this meeting mandatory. We don't necessarily think that that's a good idea.
So we can still request it.
We can request it. Dr. Epps has to approve it.
Has to approve
Has to approve,
the fact that we're
yes,
requesting it.
yes. So as part of our bid package, we're going to come up with a form justifying, excuse me, why we need a pre-bid meeting, why we feel it's necessary. It's not going to be everyone, but there are certain ones that we do feel it necessary, that we meet with these vendors and they fully understand what's being asked of them.
So this only pertains to maintenance or day-to-day equipment and things of that
That's
nature?
usually-
It's not when we're talking about new construction and things along those lines?
No, this is basically if we're putting out a bid or a request for bid, request for proposal, the majority of this that would be applicable for this would be maintenance. We've had occasionally food services. We put in the new kitchen here. We brought the suppliers on site to see, we need you to take this out. We need the new drain moved. We need a sink moved. So they fully understand. My fear is if we don't make this mandatory, oh, I don't need to go, I'll sneak my bid in, we got this. They're gonna come in, undercut everybody, and then not have any idea what's going on. And we end up getting into it, oh, by the way, Fort Mill, this is gonna cost you another $10,000, $20,000 after the fact. So that will be avoided, hopefully, by having these people come in.
And so it's, we can still ask him to
Absolutely,
approve the fact that this is one of the cases where we think it's important and we want them
yes.
to come in and do that.
Yes, and we would justify it, put it into the bid packet. The auditors come in. There is a clause in the code that says the superintendent can override this.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the spending limits for me?
Yes.
And I know we're saying this is a good thing, and I'm trying to get a read, and I'm not getting a read at the moment. Yeah, from you.
Oh, I was an advocate for it.
Okay.
Kelly will tell you.
Because I sit here and I go, okay, from $2,500 to $10,000, that's like 4 times over, and from 10 to 25,000, that's a lot.
I will
Now,
tell
it's
you,
not
yes.
In the grand scheme of our budget, but that's a lot.
And I absolutely agree with you. And as Leanne said, she was actually an advocate for this. I was not.
We're the more conservative today.
And We had many colorful discussions on this, because this now is going to raise the limits on the procurement cards to $10,000 that we're going to ask. I'm going to ask to be presented in front of the principals to really explain what this means for them and their budgets, that I'm not looking at these anymore. So procurement cards, purchase orders, anything under $10,000 does not cross my desk. So they're really gonna have to understand what this means for their budgets, that if they give a teacher a card, it's got a $10,000 transaction limit on it. So, but it will make life easier, especially when we start getting towards graduation items. You know, it's $3,500. Is that really worth me looking at it? So in a way, this is a very good thing. Maintenance. They now too, they can go to Home Depot, they can go to their plumber and get the items that they need to make the necessary, you know, repairs without coming to me.
So will there be a new process, perhaps at the school level, for the school bookkeepers to keep track, or?
So one of the other items in my presentation is the procedures that will explain, and we're going to roll this out to the bookkeepers. So once I have your approval, we're prepared with this document to take it to the bookkeepers. This is how it's going to work. We're also going to be monitoring this. This isn't just a carte blanche, you're going to have it. We do review and look at the POs, the requisitions that are out there. Even though we don't have to do anything with them, you know, periodically we go out there and look at them. We will look at the Bank of America transactions. We have access to all of that information, so we can daily look at what's being charged. Also in your packet is a copy of the new procedures manual. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because it's pretty much how this is going to affect the district, these code changes, and I have highlighted the changes in yellow. The other item in this are the exemptions, in which we had a previous document that the board approved back in 2016, that these are items that we purchase on a regular basis that we're asking to be exempted from this code. Because there's lack of competition, it's difficult to try to get 3 quotes, to get multiple vendors. For instance, band music, trying to get a choreographer or someone to develop marching band music. How are you really spec that to go out and get multiple quotes to do a bid? Copyrighted material, things like that, that it's just doesn't make sense to try to go out and spend a lot of time to get multiple quotes or multiple bids for it. So we've added a few items, which I've also highlighted in yellow, and we've also clarified a few items.
So the yellows are the changes from what
Yes.
it was originally in 2016?
Yes.
Okay.
So once you've had a chance to review these, I've also provided you my contact information. And if you have any questions or need clarification or would like to really understand further what some of these changes and how they're going to impact us, please feel free to let me know. And I will be back at the next meeting and hopefully we'll approve this. And we'd like to have this take effect July 1st.
For the next week.
The new fiscal year.
So, yes, so after the next meeting, if we approve it, we move forward, then we will be prepared to go to the bookkeepers and the school principals and get everybody ready to roll this out July 1st. And just to give you an idea, this is the new code that everybody, I carry this around with me, and we have it all color-coded, where people have made their changes and really reviewed it to make sure that this is in the best interest of us and what this means and how we can get it to work in our favor. So, great, thank you very much.
We're also going to get an update on academic intervention. I don't know who's starting. Amber, you starting? Okay.
How's it going? All right, let's see. All right. So you guys are familiar with this acronym by now. You guys are going to feel like pros for the first few slides. So MTSS, that's our multi-tiered system of support, and that is what we have in place to support students. And that's built out of legislation, 3 different pieces of legislation, federal and state here, that drive those actions. You guys know that, oh my, what happened to that guy? I don't know what happened to the words. They kind of went crazy. But you guys are familiar with the triangle. So tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 is what all students get. That's just teaching. That's what everybody gets when they show up to school. And that's academic, social, emotional, and behavioral are all factored into Tier 1. Tier 2 and Tier 3 are increasing intensity of intervention supports. And again, those are in all of those areas. And you can see on the triangle that the green is around all of it because it's not a path. You don't leave Tier 1 to go to intervention. You're always in Tier 1, but then you can also receive supplemental Tier 2 support and supplemental Tier 3. And it's not a path, so you don't have to pass through Tier 2 to get to Tier 3. It can all happen simultaneously, and you can be at various levels at any given time in any given area. So when we look at research, academic showed up over there. I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening to the words. They're just
Yeah, ours looks good.
Ours looks good.
fun. All right, cool. Well, I'm glad your version looks good. Academic should be down there in that big chunk at the bottom. But so when this is working perfectly, when this is working as expected according to what research looks at, Tier 1 will reach 80% of our students. And about 20% of our students will need additional supports. That's not a flaw in the system. That means it's working well because we know that's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so that's exactly what we would look for is if 80% of our students are getting what they need in core instruction, we are doing what we need to do. So just kind of giving you that metric so that you understand where that comes from. So if I'm looking at elementary, which is where MTSS is really built out and we've spent the most time with it, there are about 8,000 elementary students. So in that case, if we've got 8,000 students, 20% of that, quick math here, you're going to have about 1,600 students that we would expect to be participating in tiered intervention at Tiers 2 and 3. And this is what we do. So if we predicted about 1,600 students at Tiers 2 and 3, we actually have about 1,200 students. And this is captured through Enrich, which is our documentation system, same system we use for IEPs. And so we capture all of that information there. And about 1,200 students across all elementary schools are currently in Tiers 2 and 3. So that puts us at about 15%. So we're Fort Mill, right? We always overachieve. So we've got 85% of our students are making exactly what we would want to see happening at Tier 1.
So the reduction in numbers from 16 to 12 is not about staffing or capacity. It's really just an assessment of the child, the individual child, and whether they need a Tier 2 or 3 or not.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So that's a little bit, it doesn't show everything. And part of that is what's not captured in the data. So that number is 1,200 students, but that's not 1,200 plans. And what that means is we've got about 1,800 active Tier 2 and 3 plans. Well, why is that? Well, one student can have multiple plans because if they're at Tier 2, they may also be receiving Tier 3, or they might be receiving math support and reading support. And they might have Tier 2 reading and Tier 2 and 3 math. So you can see that one student may encompass multiple plans. So even when we look at that, we're still very well within the typical range of what we would expect to see. And some of those plans, again, every Tier 3 student will also have a Tier 2 plan. So they're automatically going to be 2 plans for that student, even though it may be one, like reading may be their area of focus. It's 2 plans because we have external support outside the classroom and then internal support within the classroom at Tier 2. The other thing that's not captured is that intervention is not a one-size-fits-all approach, just like Tier 1 is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And every one of those 1,800 plans is unique, every one. So they each involve a pretty significant process, which you can see here. And then I also gave you that as a separate chart. If it's a little easier to read, the slideshow might not be the best font version to look at. But this is our flow chart for MTSS for elementary. And this chart gets activated when we have a student who is not performing where we would like them to be. And at the elementary level, this is driven by the lead teachers. So they are at the helm. They're at that kind of cream-colored bubble at the top. We see a student that is not performing where we want them to be, academic, social, emotional, or behaviorally. This gets activated. And lead teachers will drive that process. And so every time you see one of those purple-colored diamonds, that's a decision point. So those are meetings, conversations, teams come together to make decisions. So that's what's happening at all of those purple points. All of those white rectangles, that's action. That's the work that needs to be done. And you can see in several of them, there's multiple steps that are involved in that. So that's the work of doing the intervention and then reforming the group, deciding where students are, and then do they continue an intervention? Are they dismissed from intervention? Do we escalate or decrease? There's a variety, that's hence the flow chart. There's lots of different paths that can be taken. But I think it's really important to realize when we think about there's 1,800 plans right now, that process has happened 1,800 times across the district. That's a lot of time, effort. It's working, obviously, because we can see on the other side of this that we have students that are doing well. We are seeing academic gains, and super important as we look back at academic recovery following the pandemic, this is exactly what we would want to see happening. So when we think about that, 1,800 is district-wide. 11 elementary schools, it averages about 160 plans per school. But when I look at and this is just looking from last week, so when I look at the range, I think the school that has the fewest right now is 88 plans. The one with the highest is 273 plans, and then they kind of span in between there. And what we know about those is when we look at Tier 2 plans versus Tier 3, the Tier 2 plans, there's about twice as many Tier 2 as there are Tier 3, which makes sense because for every Tier 3, you get a bonus Tier 2 plan. It's a buy one, get one free purchase. So you're always going to have an extra one of those in there. And so that makes sense. We're often going to see those situations. And what we see moving throughout is that this is going to vary, and we're going to hit this every time we hit a universal screener. So universal screeners for elementary, STAR, for math and reading, and then also we've got our academic screener, which is STAR, and then we have our social emotional behavior screener, which is our DESA, which we implemented for the first time this year. So as we hit those screening windows, we can say who's not where we want them to be, and then we can activate this process. So that will happen at least 3 times throughout the year, but it can also happen as we see situations arise in between screenings.
Can I ask you about special needs and IEPs?
Sure.
So I see that very first decision point talks about do they have an IEP or a 504? So if the answer is yes,
Yes.
then obviously you bring in that IEP team.
Yes.
Or do they then come back in, or do they go a separate route because it's handled through the IEP team?
It could be either one.
Okay.
And part of that is dependent on what are they being served for in their IEP. And so it may be that their IEP can be adjusted, or it may be that we need to adjust goals within the IEP that would reflect where we see that there is underperformance in the classroom or whatever has come up as far as the MTSS process. In some cases, their IEP is completely separate from what we see happening, and it is not a function of their disability, and so they can participate in tiered intervention services outside of that.
Okay, so it's not the 1,600 number doesn't, or the 1,200 doesn't reflect IEP students, but some in MTSS do have IEPs,
Yes.
504s, some don't, it's not.
It is less likely, more often than not, students who are receiving special education services are less likely to go through this process because they have something else that has already encompassed that. But sometimes things will come up that are outside of what the disability is, or that we need to revisit the IEP, or as they have regular reviews of their data, it may be, hey, let's go back and review, does this student need an increase in services because of what we see in the classroom? So that's a very good question. So knowing that this is a process that we've really worked hard on at elementary school, and in our last strategic plan was a big push. My role came out of that. I'm grateful for that. Thank you so much. One of the things that we know that we need to move forward with is the extension of this into middle and high school. So it does need an expansion. That was part of the purpose of this role. And then we had a little pandemic that kind of threw a monkey wrench into things. But what that also has shown us is this is a great opportunity to know that we've got recovery plans in place. And so this is a great opportunity to put some things in place more consistently, because we've got it built into our strategic plan draft that we have right now. Ms. Branning was part of my committee a couple weeks ago, so she knows all the details. You can ask her all the questions. And then we also got cognitive feedback that talked about balancing systems versus autonomy, and I know that you heard that not too long ago. And what we like about building in these MTSS plans is it does give us that. And so we've got a framework that I'm going to share with you in just a minute that allows us to build some consistencies, but also allows us to have features that are unique to each school. And we have that present right now, even in our 11 elementary schools. Like, we've got a school that has 88 plans versus a school that has 273 plans. We need some flexibility within that. And so what we've got right now, here's our timeline. So that first box is where we are now. And so we know the last time we looked at this, we saw all the things we had done up until now. Now we're really solid in our elementary plan. And so what we're doing this year is working with a model or a framework called CI3T, which stands for comprehensive integrated 3-tiered model of prevention, 3-tier, multi-tier, right? We got that lingo there. And so that is, we're working with the University of Kansas right now, and they are helping implement that with us. So we are doing what we call manual building. And basically the CI3T model says, how do you do school? All the components of school, and let's capture that so that we can see all the things that are present, all the things that are available to students, so that we know the menu of offerings that are available to students. Because we don't want to put a situation in place where the only students that get tiers 2 and 3 intervention are the teachers that are the loudest, or the parents that are the loudest, or the kids that are the loudest, right? We don't want those to be the only kids that have access. We want kids, all kids, to have access to this. Just like you asked the question, do students in special ed have access? Absolutely they do. So we want to make sure that that's in play. And so that's what the framework helps us do. And then we talked a little bit ago, we've got an SEL screener that was new implementation for us. Our goal moving forward is to continue using that framework and look at middle and high school. Because what we know, and Dr. Wakesness will talk about in a minute, is just like with elementary, we have been doing interventions all along. Whether we had it in a framework, a structure, whether it was systematic, it's always happened. So what we want to do now is build that system in place that still allows schools to have their autonomy and allows for their uniqueness, but still gives us something that we know is consistent across all schools, because it helps us be able to support them with structures in place. And then where we need additional support, it helps us see where that is. So I'm going to pass along to you. Take my water so you don't drink it.
Good evening. So as Amber mentioned, a lot of this stuff is already going on at the middle and high school level. But I think if you asked most secondary folks, are you doing MTSS? They might think, well, I don't know if we're really doing that. I've probably heard of it before, but I'm not sure. But the reality is we are doing a lot of it already. So remember, with the 3 tiers, the first tier is your core instruction. So of course we're doing that. All the stuff we do with staff development, with curriculum development, all those things we're doing already. So that's the big portion of it. We also have a lot of interventions at the middle and high schools. We have flex time. We have the remediation time. It's called something different at each middle school, but they have the flex time as well. We do recognition programs, after school programs, tutoring, homework clubs, and the list goes on and on. So lots of interventions. But the one thing that's missing is kind of like a framework that holds it all together and makes it a little more formalized. So when secondary folks hear this coming, they might get a little nervous, but we're already doing a lot of it. So one thing I wanted to, I messed it up, Joe. I was trying to go back. I put my slides out of order, and I was trying to go back a slide.
Oops.
Just trying to keep us awake, right?
Can we, okay, all right, here we go. All right, so the first slide I wanted to show is some of the funded programs and interventions that are taking place through those programs with our ESSER funding. So we had credit recovery for high school students. You see 103 students in the summer, 26 in the fall so far this year. Summer program for middle schools, and that happened at all the schools, and Springfield had an additional program, 220 students approximately, and after school programs, which are going on right now. Some schools have completed theirs, some are going on. We have face-to-face, we have virtual, and you see close to 550 students receiving interventions. So certainly doing lots of interventions. It's just a matter of formalizing them together under a framework. So I think it really goes to the question that we should be asking is, how will CI3T help us implement the components of the new strategic plan? How can we use this as a framework to implement the action steps that we have in front of us? So that's what this is really going to help us do. Give us that framework. Elementary school has done a ton of work with it. So now middle and high school, we need to do the same. And I think the other big benefit is this will allow us to really see what we're doing well, what we're already doing, what we're doing well, and what we can do to move forward. Because sometimes when you have so much going on, you almost don't realize how much you have going on. And you might not know all the different blind spots. So I think when we take a really close look at this and bring in the teams, that will help us really dig down on what we have and where we need to go from there.
Will you also be looking across the middle schools, across the high schools to compare and contrast?
Certainly.
Programs
Yes.
or
Yes.
better, or-
Yeah. So yeah, we will do that. So when they come in, and Amber, you might have to help me on this, but when they do the training, they all come in together and they work together to create a framework for middle schools or a framework for high schools, and there'll still be opportunity for them to have their own, specialized part based on their specific needs. But overall, it'll be a level framework.
Yeah, and what it does is, and this is our experience with elementary, is that when you build out that framework, it's an actual physical document. And as you do that, there are components that it takes a whole year to go through, and you kind of build it chunk by chunk as you go. And one of the components looks specifically at what we do at Tier 1, what's in place at Tier 1, and it's an opportunity for us to say, what are the things that are, every elementary school has this, and so we can go ahead and build that into every single plan, and then what's unique to each school. And so it sets a level playing field so that there's clear communication of, we expect this many minutes of reading, or we expect this many minutes of math. So it's not like, oh, this school only does 20 minutes of ELA. No one only does 20 minutes of ELA. And this school does 400 minutes of ELA. That's not what we want. But what's the baseline? What do we set as an expectation so that that's clear, and that could be driven out of what we believe as a district. It could be driven out of state law, state guidance, all of those kinds of things. So there are components that allow us to say, this is clear. Right now, and I think middle school is a great example, all of them have some sort of intervention block, but it's not necessarily something that the district had said, you must have an intervention block. It's sort of a volunteer opt-in right now. And so now we can say, everybody's going to have one. That's going to be a consistent practice. How that looks at your building, when you do that, those kinds of things would be where there's flexibility.
And I think another good example for the framework that everyone will follow is PLCs. That's something that's in the new strategic plan. So we want to make sure that we're doing PLCs, but we want to also make sure schools have autonomy to kind of tailor that to their specific needs once we get the framework down.
Can I ask you one more question? Back on slide 13 where you talked about the ESSER programs.
Yes. I would try to go back, but I'll probably mess it up on this.
These numbers that were on here were how many we did last summer and you know, how many are in these things. Do these continue this summer and next year? Some of these programs like the credit recovery and the summer programs?
They all continue through the summer. And I know elementary has plans for this summer also with the ESSER funds, but through the end of this summer, yes. Any other questions?
Did you guys say who the point person was going to be at the middle and high school level? You talked about the lead teachers really being over
The framework, the assessment.
Right. That.
So who are going to be resources at the middle and the high?
That's a great question. That's going to be a big challenge. It'll to start with one of the assistant principals, but one of the things we'll have to figure out is who will provide the interventions at the middle and high school level. So that's to be determined. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up, Mr. Burke, if you'll make your way from the back of the room. We talked about academic calendar 2 weeks ago, and you're going to talk to us about it again and maybe take a vote.
Good evening. Glad to be back in front of you guys again for the second reading of the calendar we presented. Just to give you an update of what's happened between the last meeting and this meeting, the district did post the calendar out on our social media and asked for feedback from anybody who wanted to provide it, parents, teachers, anybody who wanted to send in an email and give us some feedback on it. That particular post reached about 7,500 people. We had over 60, or right at 60 likes on it, over 10 shares from people sending it out. We did only receive about 9 emails of feedback back, so it was not a overwhelming response in email feedback back. It is a 2-year calendar, so that may have played off some of it. And again, I think this calendar, I'm sorry.
It's a long way out.
Yeah, it's a long way out, and not to mention, I do believe that this calendar pretty much hits what we've heard as the biggest issues over time. Just a little recap of that. We had, I believe, around 3 parents who were extremely happy with the exams before the break, didn't have any other issues with it. They feel that that's the most important thing over the balanced semesters. We had 1 parent who disagreed and thought balanced semesters would be a better action. Unfortunately, their recommendations are not really feasible with what we have currently in policy and in the state with how we develop a calendar. And then we got some feedback from 2 different teachers. It was more geared towards the 2-hour days. One obviously in favor, one was not in favor. So as I've always said with feedback, a lot of times it comes back split. But based on what we heard back and obviously the public comments that we got, on different pages that we look at, we felt that the calendar is still in a good place for where we'd like to present it to you tonight for approval. So I will bring it back up. Again, this is not the actual document. This is what's on there. It's just easier to read. We're also, just to let you know, we're working on a new visual version of the calendar to replace this stacking that may be a little more eye-pleasing to look at, but for now, we've still got this going on.
Change. I've gotten used to this thing over the
Yes,
years.
and we may not roll it out, let's say, next year. It may come for years after. But so what we have presented for you tonight is an 85-95 split semester, as we talked about before. Earliest possible start date is the 21st of August, which is our, by law, that's where we're at, third Monday. And of course, with an end date ending us out on May 31st in 2024. So I'll be happy to answer any other questions you guys have about the process in between or about the calendar itself.
You didn't get much, from what I saw, you didn't get much feedback about the early release dates. It
No,
seemed
we
like
didn't. We didn't see much back. We actually did have one parent who emailed in and just wanted a clarification on it because they had missed the vote at the previous meeting. Once we provided them the clarification on it, while they weren't sure they totally understood it, they basically said that we'll make adjustments as needed, no problem. So, but yeah, we didn't receive a large amount of feedback in general. But yeah, we didn't hear much from the parents on those. Mostly that came from the two teachers that sent us messages in.
And I think we need to mention it could change based on what happens in the legislature.
Sure, I mean, all of this, and again,
I like the draft. I like the stamp.
Yes.
The bigger stamp that I was looking
yeah.
for.
Well, that's just for draft. That goes away after you approve it. But if you will notice, on the one that we're going to send out, the finalized version, it actually has a much bigger box section in the middle that says, you know, this is approved, but it could change for any number of reasons. And it's restated again in the clause that it's always in at the bottom of the calendar. So, and there are things that could change for positive reasons. They could shift the law, and we may move our start date up to make all of that moot. So, but yes, there are concerns about what the legislature may or may not do. I know that Mr. Ollinger and I have looked at all that. We may still be able to do this depending on which direction they go. In conjunction, we may or may not. It just all depends on whatever's finalized out of Columbia.
And this is the first time that we've done a second year out.
Right.
After, you know, like
Yeah, so we approved 2 years of calendars
Right.
a year ago or a year and a half ago. And now this would be the first time that we're re-upping that process to stay
just
2 years
like we
ahead.
did last meeting, the one for the upcoming year,
It's
we
changed.
did make some
Yeah.
tweaks to it.
Yep.
And so I anticipate that this time next year, we'll still have a calendar review that will include
Sure.
making sure that it sticks.
And I'll be honest with you, we may not even be done with next year's calendar. We found out, you know, obviously at the beginning of this school year, the State Department didn't come out until June, I believe, with staggered start for kindergarten.
Right.
So we may be seeing that. Right now, that's not open to us, but they may come out in June and say, okay, next school year, you can do staggered start, which means at that point, we'd have to revisit even the upcoming calendar. So because we're at the mercy of how we build all this stuff by the legislation and what initiative State Department puts in, there are always changes. This is just something general to help our parents with planning for future. Obviously, we haven't made any significant changes to like spring break or those kinds of things over the years. So this is kind of to help our parents out. Yes, the start and end dates could shift, but even if they shift, they don't usually shift by more than a day or two unless there's a major legislative change. Obviously, last year's school calendar, I mean, I think we approved it 4 or 5 times.
So with the leap days that got added or whatever they were called.
Yeah, so, and all of that was because of either changes at legislative level or, you know, in response to COVID, that kind of stuff. So while it changes, we do hear feedback from our parents that they do like having the 2 year out. Like, it really does help at least somewhat to know where the major stuff is going to fall at. When the semesters will fall is obviously one of the biggest questions. And we hear that from everybody from early graduates to, you know, graduates that are ending at the end of the year to, you know, when can I plan this vacation? When can we plan to leave for Christmas? We have a very, I won't say transient, but very traveled population when it comes to any holiday in this district. Even if it's just a 3-day weekend, you know, we have a lot of travel that gets planned. So we're trying to at least, this was one of the biggest asks we got from parents back when we were just doing 1 year calendars, which could you at least give us 2 so we can start to make plans. So I think this has been a positive response since we started this process.
I tend to agree with the one
comment that we got back about the timing of the planning days. But given that we have one comment,
Yeah.
you know, I'm willing,
Well-
let's give it a shot, see how it works.
And putting those planning days on a Fridays was a concession to our parents.
Right.
It's easier to make plans on how to deal with an early release day on a Friday than it is on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I think that in that particular comment, you know, the staff just needs to understand that, and we will make this very clear, this is work time. This is not for you to leave early or plan any other things. Like, this is written in a specific manner that it is for planning and collaboration with your teams. And I think Dr. Ieps has made that very clear in the talking about this and everything we've communicated out to our principals, that that's the point of this. You know, I mean, and again, if it's not gonna get used for that, then we'll have to look at other options, so.
I literally saw a discussion with a friend of mine that lives in Chicago today, and they've decided for the rest of this year to do early release days on Wednesday
Yep.
for their high school students. And I think they were focused on the student burnout and just a break and a catch-up midweek. And so we may find that a midweek may work better, I don't know, but again, I think.
There are a lot of options that are used. I've seen late start day figured in to either a weekly or monthly, or like some districts use it in that fashion. That gets a little tougher on parents because they're trying to figure out going, you know, work in the morning you don't ever want to be late to work in the morning. So it's usually easier to work something out in the afternoon. But there are a lot of different options we looked at. We thought this worked best for our district and for our parents.
I think it's also important that just everybody understand that we had heard that the teachers felt like they needed more planning and they were getting overwhelmed. And so this is our way of listening to what they're saying. And I think like anything else, you try it. You know, let's try it, let's work, let's see how it works for our parents, for our students and our teachers. And if it's a good thing, we keep it. And if not, then we can always try something else the following year.
And that's why the disclaimer's there.
That's right.
And on the 85, 95, we talked about, hashed that out last time, and just as sort of a recap, I'm not a real big fan of that. I mean, it gets my attention, but given what we know about school and testing and other factors in the springtime, particularly the late spring time, and given the other restrictions that we have, I think it's worth it. It's valid. We should go for it.
And I think at this point too, it's also to keep in mind that under this calendar, we're able to at least try to accommodate that and get those exams in beforehand. I hate to get too far out, but in the 24, 25, it's going to get really bad. And then things start to cycle back through again. But, you know, and we'll have to make assessments at that point based on the days. And obviously, if there's any changes in legislation
Ends up being
by then.
a
So,
82, we may say,
Yeah.
never mind.
yeah.
We may just take exams after Christmas.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. So parents understand there's all different types of clauses in the law that you have to follow. So like you can't have a semester that, even though we go to school for 180 days, which is a 90-90, you can't have a semester schedule that takes you below 80, which, I mean, again, nothing matches up to everything when you add up the days as far as the law goes. So we hit those calendar years where the late start puts us where we can only get 81, 82 days. You know, you start getting a danger zone at that point.
You have a,
Especially if you have a weather
I
event.
would say you have a
Yeah.
broken water line and all of a
Right.
sudden.
Yeah, or a hurricane that comes through.
So, I mean, you know, and that's the challenges of the third, you guys all know this is the third Monday that causes all this problem. So, but fortunately, I think this year's calendar and the 23-24 year, I think still meets all the needs and desires of our parents, our teachers, and allows us to create a positive academic calendar.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration for the 23-24 school year calendar as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the 23-24 school year calendar as presented. Is there any further discussion?
Yes. I still want to put my disclaimer out that it is still my mission and my goal every year to be extremely loud in Columbia, that they hear that this law is not conducive to education, and this is not something that is a partisan thing, this is an education thing, and we should be allowed to set our calendar based on what works in our district and what we believe is the best for education of children. And we might have a little something behind us that says, statistically speaking, we're qualified to make those decisions.
Any further conversation, discussion?
I'll be
All right.
there in April.
I second that.
I'll be there in April. Every year.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the calendar is approved.
Thank you. We'll be getting these all posted online and sent out to parents beginning tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
All right, short and sweet. We are in need of an executive session to receive some personnel recommendations, contractual issues, and legal issues. And Brian's here.
And
so
Mr.
he'll join
Murphy
us
has
for us.
joined just in the nick of time. I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session.
All right, we are in executive session. Thanks, everybody.